Welcome to Be Evolved, a podcast for parents and educators who prioritize developing possibility and expansion within the total educational process for themselves and their children or students. We invite you to listen to the podcast with your child or student in mind and with yourself at the center of the learning experience. Ultimately, our goal is to bridge the gap between educational expertise and research, translating it into practical action. Gaining knowledge plus taking action is what it means to be evolved. Hello, everyone. I am really excited about our February edition of Be Evolved because we are going to definitely evolve our understanding of the power of Polygence. And we're here with Jin, who is the founder of Polygence. And I can't wait for everyone in our audience to get to know you, Jin, your work, your group, and just all of the wonderful impact it is already been making all of this time, but can also make for those who are coming in from the Evolved community. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right over and have you introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll dive into our conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mary, for having me. It's such an honor to be on this podcast. And as Mary said, hi, everyone. My name is Jin. Super excited to be here to share, my story and also share a little bit about mentorship with you all. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. So I grew up there up until age 18, upon which I came to the US for college. I studied comparative literature over at Princeton. And then after that, I decided I really was nerding out with literature, really loved learning different languages. And so I hopped over to the West Coast to pursue my PhD at Stanford. And then in the middle of that, I decided I wanted to do something more impactful than, just working on my own research. And so then I decided to start Polygence. And so the rest is history. That was like almost 6 years ago now. And yeah, super excited to be here.
Amazing. So I'm so curious. I want to dig in on that in particular, because as a college counselor, that's sort of the seat I'm working within, right? I'm working with these students who are anywhere from, even 8th grade, let's say, all the way through 12th grade, maybe looking at even a postgraduate or something like this. So, tell us a little bit about why do you think it's so important, especially right now, for students to have access to mentors?
That is such a good question. And there's been so many, recent books and research studies that have been published that essentially tell us that teens are disengaged. There's this really great book that was recently published by Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop called The Disengaged Teen, where it essentially says that almost 50% of teens essentially say they are disengaged, that they don't feel prepared for the future, and that they're just uninspired by what's coming in the future. And that's really alarming, given that teens are, our next generation, our future politicians, our future startup, entrepreneurs, our future everything. And there's also another stat that I wanted to share here with you all, which is that in 3rd grade, 74% of kids say they love school, which is great. But by 10th grade, it's 26%. And school feels like prison for so many of these kids. And I think because school is obviously, one teacher to usually a large-ish class size, I think this plus, I think all the learning loss, the executive function skill loss that we've seen throughout the pandemic is all the more reason why having one-on-one mentorship and one-on-one customized, personalized guidance and attention is, I think, the only way for us to solve this problem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense on my end too, because, I'm the founder of Evolved, and we're really providing one-to-one wraparound educational services for students. And one of the things, I just retired from tutoring, kicking and screaming a couple of years ago, to be honest. I was really wanting to keep going with that, but my other work called me in a different direction and I needed to give space to that. But, I still work with families one-to-one. I still work with schools one-to-one and teachers one-to-one. And when you get to have that engagement, that level of attention, really fascinating evolution happens. And it's such a fulfilling exchange really between the mentor and the person who's the mentee, if you will, right? So, what would you say on your end? What are you noticing in terms of the mentorship that you're providing at Polygence, and how does that shape the student's ability to pursue academic research and creative projects? Really, how does it, in a sense, right, flip that switch over to engagement?
Yeah.
In the schooling process. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think what's really interesting is that in our model, this is oftentimes the first time ever in the student's life, like in a high school student's life, that they're being asked what they're interested in.
Mm.
Because throughout high school and throughout schooling, they're being assigned homework. They take classes that are, largely mandatory. Maybe they have one or two electives. Projects are assigned. They're never really asked sort of like, if you could dream up whatever you want to do, what would you do? And so this is kind of that scary first step of asking the student, what do you want to do? And then giving them all the support, the resources that they need. And so this is very much a very scary, but very liberating unlock that we've seen sort of students at the beginning kind of freeze up with, because they're like, I've never been asked this question. Like, what do I do with this newfound freedom? Like, why don't you assign me a project? Why don't you tell me what I should do? And it's like, no. This is training for what the future is like, where you have to be the one in the driver's seat deciding what you want to do. And so I think it's about giving students that agency and allowing them that autonomy that is so important in college and beyond, but that we don't really train students up on that at all in high school until first year of freshman year. And suddenly they're being asked to manage their own time. They're being asked to come up with capstone projects. So I think there's a lot of alignment actually between what you were mentioning about what Be Evolved does and also sort of our pedagogical mission as well, which is to put the students in the driver's seat, right? Like they're going to have to make decisions about their life come, freshman year and beyond. Why not start earlier?
Yeah, it really does align with our mission. And that's why I think our audience is going to just love your group and your work so much and be so attracted to it, because we're really a company that starts with helping families at the earlier stages, even just like learn about who their child is. And parenting to us is a journey of that question always being at the forefront. Who is this child? Who am I as a parent, even as I'm going through all of this, right? And I think we definitely all sort of walk that walk too as parents and, and educators and things like this.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm so curious about, because I feel like parents who are listening, I don't think they're going to have an issue with saying, this is such a great thing. Like yes, this makes great sense. Like I really see it coming to something special here. But let's go beyond it in our conversation. I can imagine, for instance, now, let's say you have a student come in and they say, I'm really interested in climate change. I'm really interested in solving the health problem that I notice my family member has. Or I think that this particular right, let's just say that my identity doesn't have should be in existence. Or, there's lots and lots of ideas that perhaps they may want to sort of, go down the road and explore. How do you see that being, I guess, connected to what's happening in like the wider world for industry, for kids, for, what is a pursuit like that doing for them to really expand their understanding of maybe their more insular world of, I go to school every day, I come home, I'm going to my sports, I'm talking with the same people, I'm maybe looking at the same social media, right? I'm definitely in this very predictable situation, right, in my high school existence. So, the question I think I laid out was, how do you see the role of mentorship evolving in the context of global educational trends? I think that's kind of where I'm heading this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually more so than the content of whatever the student picks, whether it's, I'm interested in, gene therapies to solve this cancer that, my aunt has, or like you said, I'm looking at the LA fires and I'm just like really interested in climate change and, the change in precipitation and how that leads to crazy disasters. I think more than the content of what the student actually gets interested in, the amazing thing about getting them hooked onto a subject like that is teaching them what intrinsic motivation can do. And I think that is what is the most important thing in terms of the global context of where we want education to be. More than we need leaders to work on climate change, more than we need, the next sort of cancer gene therapists. I think it's more about how do we get the next generation feeling that fire in their belly, that drive that has been so lacking, I think, in Gen Z in general, not because it's their fault, but because of social media, because of COVID, because of, all the online learning and learning loss that happened through the pandemic. And I think where we're evolving is essentially we want our teens to essentially be engaged from now on, right? Like that, I think, is the major power of something like individual mentorship, research mentorship that can give to students and families. I often tell, our families, what project you work on almost doesn't matter. What matters is that you find something that you will want to get up at 6 a.m. every day to think about, read about, that you find something that you feel motivated to read about and think about after school when you're really tired, after soccer practice, when you're already so tired. And I think it's that kind of intellectual resilience and drive and excitement that ultimately matters the most. I know that's sort of like an abstract answer to your question, but I really think that, yeah, that more than any kind of content is what's going to make or break, I think, this next generation.
For sure. And do you think it sort of made me think of a secondary question. Do you think that this particular generation is sort of stalled out because of, like, I have a couple of assumptions, right? It's like, I don't think I should really start that because I have this imposter syndrome, because there's really people out there that probably know what they're really doing. And I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just a kid. Or I see on social media, all these people seem like they have it all together. I'm just jumping in. I don't know what I'm doing. Or is there something else that's sort of preventing that? I guess it doesn't really in some ways matter. What you're saying is really this program gives the student the catalyst for whatever is needed to sort of overcome any of those resistive factors that may be really present for these kids at this age. Is that something, that you've seen or something that you want to say more about?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned resonates a lot. I think the core problem that we're facing with this generation right now, I think, is just information overload, both in terms of how easy they can find any kind of information with ChatGPT, with Google, with Perplexity, you name it, with their phones, that they don't have the time or the space to actually dive very deep into one subject, or they don't even have the permission to do that because they're constantly being bombarded by this friend liked your post, there's a new tweet over here, and there's an email here. And so I think part of the training here too is let's turn off all that noise. Let's pair you with someone who is an expert in the field that you are really, really excited about. And let's give you the permission to dive really, really deep into this one topic and produce something that you could be really proud of. Not produce something in 5 minutes or 30 seconds because that's how long TikTok videos are or whatever, but spend actually, 3 to 6 months working on this thing. And so I think part of it is also kind of retraining students' attention span to spend a couple months on something when they're used to spending no more than 5 seconds, scrolling on things. So I kind of see it as related in that sense. And then I think the flip side of that too is that you asked earlier about the power of mentorship and the benefits of mentorship. I think what I've seen and what I've been so pleasantly surprised by is that our students and mentors develop relationships beyond just the academic sort of mentorship side of things. Sure, the mentor who's a PhD candidate at, let's say, Cornell in biosciences is helping the student with, writing a paper on XYZ. But the coolest part of that relationship is I see the mentor sharing life advice and sort of their own college major choice journey and sort of that kind of near peer mentorship building and that relationship building that these students so crave, right? Because most people in their lives are either their parents or teachers who are much older than them. Whereas these mentors are in their late 20s, early 30s. They've kind of just been through what the kid has been through, but is far enough ahead that they're able to give them that kind of perspective and advice that oftentimes that part of the relationship is what the kid also takes away the most from the kind of research project that they do with us.
That makes really good sense. I know I can remember I've been an educator since, well, my mother would say since I was very, very young. I had the whole neighborhood over teaching school. But, when I was in college, for example, I went to NYU and we got to go into student teaching for 4 semesters, which at the time, this was the 90s, it was sort of unheard of. You usually just went for 1. But I remember that being very special because I was able to go into schools in the neighborhood and many of these teachers were literally just a couple steps ahead of me. And I was able to see sort of how they were so resourceful. I wrote grants. I sort of followed their footsteps very early on in my career, and it really was very, very, very impactful. Similarly, my parents are in medicine and they have invited me into their work in different capacities, also doing different things. And I learned how to write a grant from seeing my dad's grants, with bio research and stuff. But it's you don't really learn these things unless you're in that kind of a relationship. So I can totally see that being so impactful as I can relate to it. Let's get into maybe, some of the the projects just to showcase some of the exciting, I know we're not focused on the end product. I really do get that. And I know our audience gets that. So you can even talk about some of the, transformative pieces beyond just sort of the end product if you want to. But, what are some of the most impressive or inspiring projects that your students have created in mentorship?
Absolutely. I'll maybe give you one example in the STEM, sort of in the sciences, and then one in the fine arts or humanities, because I think one common misconception, because there's so much more, research being done, I guess, in the science fields, that most people think, oh, you guys only do science projects, right? And that's actually not true at all. We have tons of social sciences, economics, humanities types of projects as well. In the sciences, one of my favorite projects is actually by a student who I think did this, 2 years ago now. His name is Yusuf, and he lives in Michigan. And one of his chores at home was to shovel snow off of the driveway. And he just really did not like that chore. He was also very interested in robotics. And so he decided to combine this very personal, I guess, passion of his with this chore thing that he has to do. And he designed a robot that would detect and automatically melt snow off of his driveway. And he built this robot with the help of his mentor. I mean, all of our mentors are online because they live anywhere in the US. And he had some prior robotics knowledge. So he was able to, work on this robot and sort of through Zoom calls with the mentor, troubleshoot anything. And he also patented this technology, which essentially detects snow and then spreads salt just on his driveway and then moves and then spreads salt. And I just think this is such a wonderful project because it's super personally motivated. You wouldn't be able to think of doing a project like this if you just picked a project out of a hat. It's something that comes from his own life experience and background, and it's authentic and genuine. And also, if you think about it from the very sort of transactional point of view of college admissions, that's also what colleges are looking for, something authentic and genuine. But that aside, it's also about what we talked about earlier. How do we empower students to be observers of their own life and figure out problems and interesting questions that they can tease apart and pick on to develop into something bigger, whether it's for school or, maybe start a future company or something like that. That's the kind of skill and the kind of acumen that we're training in these students. And this kid just had it from the get-go. And then the third thing too is a lot of people, I think, wonder, oh, if it's just online mentorship, how much hands-on stuff could you actually do? If I want to build a robot or I want to, I don't know, build a prototype or build a model, there's actually so much you can do with an online virtual mentor if we empower the student to be independent. And I think that's the other thing, right? Students need to learn how to be able to work on their own, troubleshoot things on their own, even without someone watching over their shoulder. And I think obviously that requires the student to be of a certain age, that requires some prior experience. But I think this is also a really good example of just how much you can achieve with, an expert that's online that we found for you because it's the perfect fit, but not because they're in your backyard. And so that's an example of a STEM project. An example of a humanities or a fine arts project is we had a student who was really, really passionate about fashion design and also about just ball gown design. She also really loved art history, and she identified this painting that I think was from the 19th century, where this lady was painted wearing this beautiful, very sort of elaborate gown. And she decided she wanted to recreate it for her Polygence project. And so we paired her with a Broadway fashion sort of costume designer. And she actually learned how to do sketches, historically accurate sketches of this kind of dress. She learned sewing techniques. She actually made a replica of the dress that was, painted in this painting. And that was her Polygence project. So it's a really cool, hands-on, but also historical and sort of artistic project all woven together. And I think another really good example of a very personally motivated and very authentic and genuine topic that's motivated by her own passions, her own interest in art, and her own, hobbies. I think she knew how to sew beforehand, and she wasn't a complete beginner. And I think it also goes to show how research projects don't always have to end up in research papers, even though obviously that is a very common thing that students choose to pursue. But some of the most amazing projects that we've seen, like the two that I just mentioned, are not research papers published in some fancy journal. They're just really cool, really unique, and you'll never forget it once you hear about them. So Yeah, wanted to share those too.
Really true. I'm going to hire that kid to come because I would like a robot to do my laundry. That'll be my Polygence project. How about we work on that?
That's a
No,
great
no
project.
prior robot building experience here, but I'm really motivated. So if you're listening and you have this already made, send it my way. Gotta figure it's coming, right? I just love this so much because, I think something that attracted me to education to begin with was always the curiosity that I held around each and every student I ever met. And I was actually a classroom teacher for many years, but it really wasn't a perfect fit for me because I would delve so very deeply into each and every one of my students and be so individualized that I really had a hard time being a categorical worker, meaning I couldn't really grade you just on a rubric. I would sort of see your gifts and say, well, you're approaching it in this way and it's so lovely. And I just love the way that you do this. And it didn't really work out that way in the classroom, but I found my way, obviously, to the work that really does fit me now. And I'm thriving. And I think ultimately, that is something I'm sure mentorship also can provide, is that introspection. We talk a lot about that in our company because we also get students coming in who are applying for various grades, especially for middle school, high school, and then of course for college. But really in those early years, like you mentioned, it's the first time we're asking a child, who are you? What do you like? And by the way, that can change tomorrow. It's okay. I'm just simply asking at this moment, so it's that introspection. And then it's also the ability to communicate about who you are. And I think that that's a very important skill to have for lifelong reasons in a career. Like I don't know where your career started and ended exactly, but you told me you started in academic research and then moved into this mentorship work. And, I think that if you really talk to people long enough, right, in their careers, they've often pivoted and sort of made changes based on what they've been interested in. And hopefully this sort of helps students to realize that that's possible through experience. They've actually learned how to just delve into something and it doesn't always have to stay there. It could, right, change into something else. So there's so much rich depth to all of this that I'm really just loving. And I also just went to see Wicked on Broadway, and those costumes, just wow.
Wow.
I mean, some people have all the gifts. That's all I have to say. It was absolutely the most incredible thing. I mean, besides the acting and the music, and I mean, just every part of it was incredible. Okay, so next question. I'm trying to look at where I am because I want to make sure we get to everything. So it's really cool. Well, I think we kind of talked a little bit about, the projects and sort of how they helped them stand out. But if you wanted to add in anything about how, a lot of times parents will come to us because they need to get their kids into college. It's a catalyst for the work that we do, right? I need to get my child into college. Okay, fair. Now we start talking about their resume because that's a pretty big deal right now in a lot of college admissions pieces. And then, of course, that's what led me to you because I'm looking for resources to get kids to be more engaged, like you said. And so now the question that I have is sort of how do these projects, in your experience on your end, help kids to stand out in their academic or professional pursuits?
Yeah. So I think what's really important, and you know this probably better than anyone else, is that I think colleges are looking for authentic stories, right? They're looking beyond just grades. So many kids have the same grades. So many kids have the same, captain of XYZ team, debate tournament, XYZ leader. Those things matter, but they're no longer enough to help them distinguish between student A and student B. And I think what really matters is finding that kind of authentic and genuine and real story and narrative that fits that student's intellectual profile, whether they're, someone who really cares about climate change or someone who loves fashion and wants to, become the next fashion designer. Having a story that's easy to tell and easy to for the admissions officer to hold on to is something that is really important and something that we've seen projects do better than anything else. It does better than grades. It does better than any kind of extracurricular. But beyond that, we also think that that kind of intellectual resilience that, doing research and failing and going through that iterative process, that kind of, I think, mental prowess that it gives to students benefits them beyond college, right? I think the research project's benefits go way beyond helping a student getting into college, even though that's obviously, probably the first thing that's on families' minds. And we've seen, students talk about it in personal statements. We've seen students talk about it in alumni interviews, on their extracurriculars list. There are lots of different ways students can even attach the actual final product as a supplement to their application. It just depends on, I think, what fits that student's profile and the narrative they're trying to tell.
Yeah, that makes really good sense. I mean, it's just giving them so much to talk about because it's an experience that they're actually having and an engagement that they're having, and they can really talk about that. So helpful. Well, I think we've talked about the next section because I was just sort of connecting our fundamental goals and sort of how we align together. I mean, I think it's a bit obvious in terms of what we've already talked about, but surely what's always been very important to me is that a student is understood, known, seen, heard, truly also projectively understood and heard in an admissions process. Interestingly, here in New York, I live in New York City. The system here is very, very, very complicated. There's a lot of school competition to get into schools. There's a lot of optionality here. You can go to public schools, but even public schools has its own layers of screens sometimes. It can get very complicated, right? And so I love that because, of course, I love to teach and make things that are complicated become less complicated. But, I think what always has worked for me in the families that I serve is really coming back to who is the student? Who are you? How do you learn at your best, right? And I wanted just to give you a minute or two just to kind of talk about the next set of questions, which I think I'll just morph into one question, which is just, can you name some skills or values that you feel like, and you've talked about some of these, but maybe you could expand upon our understanding, right? What are some of the skills and the values that students develop as they're working with your mentors that maybe are less obvious to us, right? We know, of course, they're going to produce some really amazing academic skills, right? We know that they're going to have that relational piece that you mentioned. And you talked a lot about that resilience piece, right? But what else do you feel is so special about that? What are they sort of leaving with?
Yeah, a really, really important one that families don't think about at all is actually learning that it's okay to fail, because students will fail during this research process. That's basically all research is. It's failing, 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 and then getting back up, getting back up, getting back up, and then maybe finally, achieving something. And so I think one of the major, major skills is the student learning that it's okay to fall. It's okay to hit a dead end. It's okay to have like a million bugs in your code and you just like have no idea why it's not working and none of it is making sense and like you can't proceed. That's all okay and natural. And to work through that frustration to get to the point where you can have a final product that makes sense, that you can, stand behind, that you can publish, that you can XYZ, XYZ. And so I think that kind of mental fortitude, what we might call it resilience, you might call it sort of ability to fail and embracing of failure as a concept, I think is one of the most important gifts we can give to students, and something that I don't think schools encourage all that much. Because projects are such short duration, it's so clearly defined for students. There's no room to fail. There's no time to fail in school. And I think that's a really important piece of the Polygence experience that I find really important that families understand.
Oh, I just love that so much. I mean, I think it becomes a little cliche, right, for us to say, like, it's, be okay to fail. I find, we see it a lot, right, on social media and such. But I think when you're really in a safe environment with a mentor who's got you during that initial maybe fail that you're experiencing, it happens and it's really empowering and it's so important. It's going to happen. It's going to happen at some point in your life. And I think it's so true. It's a skill that you have to have. And I think, experimentation is also really important. So my latest body of work, I do a lot of writing. It's getting published on Friday. Let's see, this podcast, well, it's the 24th of January. So it'll be already out by the time we drop this podcast. But it's called The Power of Questioning, and it's a 5-step model to educational problem solving to help students learn better. And the reason I thought of it was because I'm a scientist's daughter. I'm pretty comfortable in the scientific method, right, or using the scientific method. And I have a mentor and a teacher myself who introduced this model to my business. And I said, wait a second, I think I've been using this, but it hasn't been formalized. I'm just going to go back to my notes. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, this is what I do. In education, often what we're actually doing though, is we're saying you didn't get the answer. this is missing, this didn't happen, and we stop there. Teachers are educated that way, right? You have to assess and tell them where they are. This is where you are. But we could take it one step further by just turning that statement into a question and say, how do you fix these errors? How do you go about this paper differently so that you don't have that same result next time? How do you go into more depth? And just by asking the question, there's another research study called the Zelnick effect, where you go and your brain actually just goes to seek the answer without you really even consciously understanding. But you can also design an experiment. It's not with a control group. It's sort of a non-experimental design, but you put what you think, your hypothesis, you go and you can research, you can get mentorship even to learn more about what's possible. You can increase your threshold of knowledge to get really nice hypothesis that you're going to test out, and you're going to see if it works. And a lot of times it just doesn't work because our brains are so unique, and what works for one person might not work for another, right? And that is a fail. But the fail is actually a teacher, is my point, right? And when you don't get the result that you intended, it actually just teaches you to make a left turn, as I like to say, right? Change course. And I think that experience, right, if we can really normalize it and not shame it or not make it to be such a loaded word, could be really helpful, because it's important to develop that flexible thinking that really comes with that kind of deep, deep problem solving.
Totally agree.
I love that. Okay, well, let's talk about the future a little bit. So I'm sure you're thinking ahead and you're, wondering sort of what more you can be doing in your line of work. What new opportunities or platforms are you envisioning to expand access to this academic mentorship and production?
Yeah, I think the main question we've been grappling with is like, how early can we actually introduce this type of learning, right? Because for the most part, most of the students we serve right now are in high school. We have an occasional, super advanced 8th grader, maybe even, late 7th grader who does projects with us. But I think our main vision for expanding and for thinking about how we can serve students is how we can adapt this pedagogy that we've developed that's so perfect for high schoolers, for middle schoolers, maybe even for grade schoolers. And obviously the way we interact with these younger students will be very different. It's probably not hour-long sessions. It's probably, there are lots of changes that will need to happen. But I think that's the question that we're always asking, because you might even argue that by high school, it's already a little too late, right? The earlier we can introduce this kind of autonomous thinking and intrinsic drive in students, obviously the better. But figuring out a sustainable way of doing that via virtual mentorship, I think, is the big challenge. And then I think on the other end, we're also thinking about, does this have to stop in high school? I mean, do we think, after they get into college, then this problem is suddenly solved and now they're like all amazing and open-ended problem solving? Probably not. What can we do for adult learners? What can we do for people who are still curious but are well, in their careers? What can we do to encourage this kind of lifelong love of learning is also a question we constantly ask. But I think it's probably more likely we'll target the lower, downstream age group before tackling the adult learner piece. But these are some questions that we're grappling with and thinking about for the future.
I just love all of that. And I actually would love the audience, if you're listening and you have a middle school student, I think a lot of these kinds of programs, at least for Evolved, right? But I think for Polygence too, it comes with an invitation. So if somebody calls you up and says, listen, I have this really great, 6th grade student who I really think has this curiosity about, could we actually work together and think about how to do this? I mean, a lot of the learning comes from doing. And I think, I would just invite anyone in the audience who's listening, whenever you're listening, to contact Polygence if this is at all something you're curious about, because I agree with you. I think it's a no-brainer in the, the benefit of this pursuit. I think it's really, really important. And almost the earlier we can get kids to just start normalizing the pursuit of what they are curious about, the better. And families need resources. Let's be honest. It is really not an easy situation right now for families. It has not improved by very many means, really, after the pandemic, right? We have parents who are working many, many hours. They value education, and they think they really do need resources to help do the things that could be very beneficial. And what would be even better is they don't have to leave the house. They could just hop online and be very busy doing whatever they're tinkering with, right?
Totally. We've actually currently, we've already started experimenting with some middle school friendly programs that are, group based. They're less demanding on the student. It's not like you have to schedule all of your sessions. It's sort of the same, kind of almost like a class based experience, but still very much research oriented, still very much, student inquiry driven. And so, yeah, anyone who's listening who might be interested or have feedback for us, like, would love to get in touch.
Oh, yeah, that would be great. I just think this is a really great invitation. So then, I guess talk with us just a little bit about accessibility and equity. I had two questions here, sort of, but they're quite interrelated. So maybe I'll also blend this into one. But, how do you ensure that students from diverse backgrounds have access to mentors? And are you working on anything to bridge the educational gaps for underrepresented communities?
Absolutely. So we have a financial aid program where we offer partial and also full aid to students who have demonstrated need. We also work with a number of NGOs. We work with a number of schools that are either underfunded or, have a diverse student body who would need this kind of support to essentially offer pro bono programs to their students. And so over the years, we've worked with a number of different organizations, schools. We've also worked with a school in Zimbabwe to offer our mentors. The other thing too is we have different programs at different price points, also particularly because we understand that not all students can afford our one-on-one program, but we, as I mentioned, also have group-based small classes. We also have shorter programs that students can opt into as well.
That's wonderful. I think it's always good to start thinking about that. And also maybe one of your students will have some of these and as to how all of our, private organizations can really think about filling in some of the gaps that are needed within this area.
One more thing I wanted to add, Mary. So one of the students I spoke about earlier, the one who did the robot to do the snow melting, he was a full aid student. And he's actually, something that's really incredible about him is he was a full aid student, then he went on to pursue mechanical engineering at Northwestern. And then he actually is now back at Polygence as a mentor because he has now gotten his master's in robotics. And he said this has been such a transformative experience for him that he wants to give back to the next generation and be a mentor. So that kind of full circle is just so incredible.
It really means a lot. That means, it just speaks to the power of the whole entire construct. And I think it's such a lovely thing to have that be the future for your organization, but also it's a really nice home for that particular student. It obviously is his gift too. He's able to really turn it around and give it to others. That's just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So for educators and parents who are usually the people who are listening, right, are parents and teachers. So what advice would you give to us who want to encourage students to give it this deeper dive into some kind of exploration?
One thing I would say is to teach students how to ask good questions. I think at the heart of this whole problem of students not knowing how to take the reins and be in the driver's seat is they've never asked questions. They've always learned how to answer questions really well, but they've never been the ones to ask questions. And so cultivating that kind of curiosity and ability to formulate a question, I think, is the single biggest gift someone can give their child or their student. And that might be in the form of like having the student journal, like 10 curiosities they might have on any given day about anything that they might see in the world. It might be sort of just talking about it at dinner and talking about what were you curious about today? Like, what were some questions you had about anything? I think without solving that problem, it's really hard to unlock that kind of student autonomy.
Makes really good sense. Well, they can come to my problem solving workshops.
Yes, exactly.
Get that gear going. So, and then we'll throw them over to you once they figure out how to ask good questions. It's really the education system that I sit in, that I observe. I'm able in my seat and, not in a school, I'm not teaching anymore, right? But I'm sort of on the outside, which sort of does help me to have some perspective. But I am still trained as a teacher, right? And I think that we really do think in a very punctuated way, right? We end our work with a period instead of a question mark often. And I really want this work to start to change that because I already see it in my work, moving students right over to where you are, which is really where they can be. This is the possibility of where you can be for your entire career, which is super exciting. So that engagement can happen for their whole lives. So that's something I'm really interested in working on. So just a little personal, I would love to get a little bit into that. One founder to another, I'm just curious, I can only imagine, but what are some of the most rewarding parts about leading Polygence besides that amazing story of that student coming back around and working with you?
I think it's just really seeing the breadth of possibility and potential that these young kids have. Like, I never would have thought that high school students could build snow robots, that we had one kid who won this competition to look at basically certain genes that cause this particular type of cancer. It's just like wild, the kinds of things that these students are able to do. And to know that, I think it's because of that virtual connection and that expert connection that they're able to achieve that and have that confidence, I think is just one of the most incredibly rewarding parts of Polygence. And then I also think back to comparing, let's say if I did go down the path of academia, let's say I decided not to start this company with my co-founder and I, continued pursuing the PhD and became a professor, the kind of impact I would have had there, maybe like max 40 students I would teach every year in small seminars and papers that maybe like 3 people would read, versus here where we've had over 4,000 students do projects. And like, it's just, I think that the scale of the impact is also, I think, where the feeling of fulfillment comes from.
For sure. For sure. You're really affecting human lives in really profound and important ways. And it's just, well, I'm just so proud of you. And I'm excited to have this time with you. It's really, really inspiring. So I guess we'll end maybe here. I don't know if there's something else we didn't get to, but let's see. I'm looking down at my questions.
Most of the things.
Yeah, I feel like we got to so much, which was really, really fun. So I guess we'll kind of sort of end here with how can listeners learn more now they've gotten to know your work. They're really excited about all this, whether they have a 4th grader or a 14-year-old or even a student in college, right? How can they get involved with your organization? Besides coming through us, because we have a partnership with you. So you can always contact us and have a conversation, and we can obviously put you over there. But go ahead and tell them how they can get to you directly.
Yeah. First thing is just head on over to our website, which is www.polygence, that's POLYGENCE.org. And there you can look at our programs. You can sign up to create an account, and that's when you can get all of our email information as well. And then secondly, if you wanted to directly contact us, if you have specific questions, you can email us at students@polygence.org. That's students@polygence.org. And one more thing I'll mention, actually, I forgot to mention this earlier, is a little bit of history about our name. So our name Polygence, as I mentioned, is POLY and then gens, comes from the Greek root for many, which is poly. And then we took the last part of intelligence, because we celebrate multifaceted and all kinds of intelligence. And so not many people know about this in terms of like the story behind our name, but it's something that's very crucial to how we think about multiple intelligences and how we want to celebrate each student.
Oh, I'm in love with it. I just love all of it. So this is wonderful. Just so you know, you don't have to have a pen and paper. We'll put all of the information that Jen just shared with us in the notes for this podcast, which again will drop in February of 2025. I am sure whenever you are listening to this information is going to be valuable for you, that this is lasting stuff. So Jen, I want to thank you so much. You're so inspiring. Your work is impactful and meaningful. I'm so happy to have found you for our students, and for my own children are getting involved. So we're really in there. And it's just a pleasure to meet you. You're really one of a kind. And it's been a very special podcast episode to spend time with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for having me.
Pleasure.
We hope you found this episode of Be Evolved helpful. If you did, please be sure to like, review, and subscribe. It really helps us to reach more listeners like you. Want to dive deeper into specific strategies? Join me on Supercast as a subscriber. For just $5 a month, you'll get access to my private weekly feed where I share exclusive ideas and answer audience questions about learning and admissions. Have a question or comment? I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out anytime at admin@evolveded.com. That's ADMIN at EVOLVEDED.com. And don't forget, you can find the full transcript for today's episode, along with our terms, conditions, and disclaimers and privacy policies at evolvededucationcompany.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, learn well, live well, and be evolved.